Chaturvedi. Privileged to have him here with us, speak for today. As you know, at the IGRO Foundation, we have started this series about a year back, bringing in the best minds in the country on policy issues and discussing the contemporary issues that are of concern to the policymaker. It is in this context that we have invited Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, who's an authority, to speak on the subject. To chair the session today, we have our chairman of IGRO, Dr. Arvind Virmani. As we all know, Dr. Arvind Virmani has worked long years in the Planning Commission, as well as he was the Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India. And then from 2009 to 2012, he was the Executive Director representing India with other countries at International Monetary Fund, Washington, D.C. Dr. Virmani is a prolific writer, very active on Twitter on contemporary issues, and earlier he has done extensive research on India. He has published extensively in various journals. He has published books on issues pertaining to India. And now we are requesting him. And by the way, I should mention Dr. Virmani's research on China has been extensive. I've heard his presentations at the World Bank, in International Monetary Fund on China, and very, very authoritative and very well received in those places. I would now request Dr. Arvind Virmani to chair the session today. Dr. Virmani, please.
Thank you, Charan. Let me go straight into it and start by introducing Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, who is currently the Director General of the RIS, the Research and Information System for Developing Countries. He works on issues related to development economics, development finance, SDGs, South-South cooperation, and of course, in trade and investment and innovation linkages, which are kind of a very important part of RIS's work, with a special focus on WTO. He is also a member of the Board of Governors of the Reserve Bank of India. He has edited more than 20 books and contributed several chapters, published many journal articles. He is on the editorial board of the South Asian Economic Journal, IDS Bulletin, Sussex, UK, among others. His book, Logic of Sharing, Indian Approach to South-South Cooperation, has been acclaimed internationally as one of the best volumes on international development cooperation. He's also credited with the launch of a network of Southern think tanks, NEST, and the Forum for Development Cooperation, FIDC. He has created the Delhi Process, a major forum for exchange of ideas on South-South cooperation. He also is active in working with government on policy issues. With that, let me hand it over to you, Professor Chaturvedi, for your talk.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Virmani, for a very generous introduction, and thanks, IGRO, for giving this opportunity. And let me also congratulate you for maintaining this series in very difficult times and providing a platform for exchange of ideas and for sharing some of our sort of perspectives which are emerging. And I must say, the current work that I'm presenting to you is a work in progress at RIS, where we are trying to explore several dimensions of our exchange programs that are happening across countries. And as the trade narrative is in a way going on now on the track that we all have been expecting. So from that perspective, have been trying to see in what way we can contribute and how India-China bilateral actually throws up the need to develop a much wider narrative on trade, and who else one would have desired to provide guidance than Dr. Virmani. So I'm extremely thankful to IGRO for giving this opportunity of having Dr. Vimani with us, and also giving this sort of discussion some direction when I close. So I think at the outset, let me bring in the context within which I am going to present India-China. And I think we need to contextualize India-China bilateral trade, which is in news all the time. Today also, you might have seen a statement by Foreign Secretary saying in terms of the huge line of security sort of drill on our borders, and the widening trade gap that he talks about, and also says how it has gone up. But of course, as everybody would agree, the COVID crisis has actually stirred us up in terms of what Atmanirbhar Bharat actually means. Because from 2015 till 2019, we were talking about it, but actual implementation on ground was discernible only through few flagship programs and not the way one would have desired. So from that point of view, some more action, some more substantiation and strategy was needed, and there are several actors who have been contributing in the process. And some of the influential economists, including Dr. Veermani, have been trying to shape the narrative, the policy decisions, and also our interactions with various line ministries for various actions. In this context setting, I wanted to bring out the sort of binary that we usually end up with of domestic demand-led growth and the export-led growth, the DDLG and ELG, the broad dimensions of strategies, whether we want export-led growth like what we saw in case of Southeast Asia, or domestic demand-led growth. So we would say that we don't need anybody. We are happy with our own domestic demand-led growth. And then we find China saying that no, combination of both is important. And that's what China demonstrated. And now China says that domestic demand-led growth would be a priority, even if the exports are compromised, etc., etc. To what extent one can believe on that, to what extent one should substantiate that through what action they are taking. But I think for us, this is a combination, and we are getting out of this binary and trying to see how both can be leveraged, and that's where the effort is. The second point that I want to mention is about India's trade deficit. And there is a popular perception that FTAs have ruined us, FTAs have enhanced our trade deficit, and we should revisit FTAs. It happened not only in official track one, but also in almost all public sort of discussions and debates. So we need to bring in data and optimism that is needed for us to look into it, and I would come back on this little later. The third point that I want to make is about rising product and sectoral trade concentration with certain trade destinations. And this is where diversification is important. It is important for Commerce Ministry, but it is also important for other line ministries, particularly our export promoting agencies, to see that that concentration is avoided, particularly if our dependence on source of import is there. And that's my next point in terms of how India's import dependence on certain key basket cases has multiplied, and that with China has multiplied many times. So these are the 5 points which I wanted to mention at the outset in terms of context for my talk today. I also wanted to mention some upbeat facts which are coming in as the story is unfolding. We find time and again statements like India is a trusted partner, countries are showing keen interest for us, and they are also becoming partners. We have in this dispensation, since Prime Minister Modi came in, we have signed one MOU, which is a sort of free trade agreement with Mauritius. And we have backed out of RCEP, but our discussions, as Honorable CIM said in one of his talks recently, are on with the UAE, Australia, UK, and Canada, and also a sort of buoyancy which is in a way supporting the domestic demand-led growth of 1.1 lakh crore mark that we have crossed for GST collection. So this is these are the two slides that I wanted to put right up front to set the context and the contours within which I would be talking for next a few minutes that I have. So if you look at the trade GDP ratio from 1990 to 2019, if we leave aside the exceptional year of 20 and 21 and have taken only up to 2019, you would see that we have seen consistent dominance of trade, and we have seen that globally also. Of late, the growth of GDP is higher than trade at the global level. In case of India, we see that the share has also, in a way, declined than the peak that we saw in 2012-13, and then we saw gradual sort of dip, which is quite understandable given the kind of global context that has also unfolded from 14, 15 onwards, maybe 13, 14 onwards. And this, I think, is all important to see some kind of dimensions which now on India-China are important. So with this backdrop, let me get into the main subject that I wanted to pick up today of India-China trade. And as I want to mention, China, the myth is why we end up importing from China. And the myth is that because China is cost competitive, and China is cost competitive, so products are cheaper, so they are able to export. And then all sorts of hypotheses would come out that they put in labor from prisons, they are doing this, they are doing that, all sorts of things. But at RIS, we compared the unit cost of production, and we found that out of 4,044 products that we are importing, China is not most competitive in the world, and in 3,326 products. Almost 82% of the products that we are importing from China, China is not the most competitive global producer. Then one would wonder, if they are not competitive, then why are we importing from China? What kind of business sense it would make? It would make business sense. Why? Because of the facilitating strategies that China has adopted. The amount of credit that is available, the amount of sea lanes that are supporting the trade facilitation measures, and also direct access to the market. Despite of the language limitations, despite of the challenges that are there in terms of procedures and things like that, China has overcome the red tape that was holding it back for many years. The composition of India's bilateral imports, if you see, and I analyze 1920 here, 8% of our products are intermediate products, where our concentration is extremely high. And as we know, and the whole work on this at RIS started with our analysis on pharmaceutical sector. 2014, when this government came in, we gave a paper to the then pharmaceutical minister Anant Kumar, which found some traction within the government, and NSA called a meeting, and then I had an opportunity to present our dependence on China in 2014, when we were importing almost 94% of our API from China. And it was in 16 that NSA called a meeting and something happened, but we did not change till 19, when Prime Minister said enough is enough, we stop and start producing. And immediately we saw 10% decline in our API imports. It was also the time when lockdown was on, But we did that. We could have done that right in 14, or actually it all started building up from 2007-8 onwards, and you find that in 10 to 13, those 3 years, it really reached peak, and we found a huge concentration in the pharmaceutical sector.
Just a clarification. Just a clarification. The
Yeah.
second, third, and fourth points onwards relate to China bilateral only, no?
Yeah.
Not the overall, right?
Not
Okay.
overall.
Oh,
So
thank you.
yeah, thank you. So so this diversification that we saw in 1918, 1920 actually could have been done much earlier. But if you see, pandemic actually helped us, and we could serve, as I was saying. The product-wise import concentration in 1920, you find that top 10 products from China constitute about 25% of import value. And if you see top 79 products, you find the value being covered is almost 50%. And if you take top 350 products, we are talking about 75% of the value of the trade. So if one has to analyze India-China trade, actually you need to analyze these 350 products. And later, as I would tell you, we picked up 327 products, and I would just come back on that point. The top 3HS chapters, almost 62% of that, they come in from organic chemicals and machinery. Machinery, we find them spread across 2 chapters of 84 and 85. The export monopoly of China, focusing on sensitive products, around 327 products are sensitive. They cover almost 66.6 billion trade out of 90.4 billion trade, which is almost 73.7%. So what I'm going to talk to you about today are these 327 products. So I say that our trade dependence on China, if it is to be analyzed, it can be analyzed through these 327 products, which cover 73.7% of the total trade. And the total trade that we took up was 90.4. And today, again, Foreign Secretary has quoted this number of around $90 billion trade. The trade deficit is around $47 billion, as he says. Now, is that all when we think of gain from China for India? So, is it that India is dependent on China, or China is also dependent on India? One may laugh it away, saying that why would China be dependent? But look at this slide, please. China, for China, India is the 7th largest export destination. And 16% of overall trade surplus for China in 2018 actually came from India, $58 billion. And if you look at the countries in RIS, we calculated the sources of trade surplus for China, and we found that US is the largest one, Hong Kong, and then Netherlands. And after that, 4th number is India. It is interesting to see that in the Trump years, and even before that, from actually from 11 onwards, you find the trade deficit between US and China was not on rise, and in 16-17 actually there was a decline. Hong Kong, leave aside, Netherlands also is declining. So India is the only market for China where trade surplus being generated out of the deficit is growing, and this is a point that I wanted to leave on table as I cover a couple of other points. The alternative competitive sources of suppliers. So if I tell my importers, no, don't go to China. China is creating trouble for us in border. No trader would agree, because they want cheap goods. They want market share. So they would go to them. So what is the problem? The problem is that at times asymmetry in information is a major challenge for us. We are not aware what other sources are available. So people would say, no, the trader knows the best, and he would find it out. So don't bother about that. That's not the case. You need to do the hand holding and getting other markets created. And that's what China has been doing. The tourists from China are sent to different countries in the nationally chartered planes, and so are the trade alternative avenues. We also need to do the same for our importers. Unfortunately, we have export promotion councils, but we do not have councils to do handholding for our imports because cost effective quality imports are equally important. We have export inspection council, but we do not have import inspection council. So we do not know what quality imports are coming in and who is checking them, what kind of product standards we have. Since I was part of the APIDA in 2003, when Australia started exporting apples, till in our technical committee, we came up with this solution in 2005 of defining the outer layer of juicy apples and crunchy apples from Australia to block them from 5 to 8, 2005 to 2008, and save Himachal apples. I would not have understood this trade dynamics of the non-tariff barriers or standards. And this is what China has been doing. So we need to understand this game much more deeply, and need to understand the alternative sources of these products. So out of these 327 products, we found that 323 products have their alternatives, and we found it for 17 other countries. We divided those 17 countries into three groups. What countries, if the cost would go up by 5%, then by 10%, and by more than 15%, because our importers would have to have matching sort of options. And this full analysis we gave to CIM, we gave to NSA, and to line ministries. We have made two presentations on this in the government. So phased out relocation of imports possible in 5 years, and we can do that. India can shift around $10 billion from China in short run. So from 20 to 24, we gave a plan, and we said in the COVID period itself to embark on that strategy to reduce our import dependence and find out alternative sources. Indulge in sort of limited free trade agreements. And fortunately, things are moving now, particularly in terms of augmentation of production capacity at home as a strategy, but also for short-term supply constraints, we can get into special arrangements with some of the partner countries. India's dependence and limitations in market access is something that Dr. Bhimani has extensively written about, and I think the story continues. The non-tariff barriers from China, the impositions from China, compulsory certification that is needed, and also the tariffs. I would have a table in one of my next slides where I would show that it's agriculture tariff from India, which may be high, but manufacturing we are quite competitive to China. So Chinese barriers are also tariff barriers for us, and not just NTBs. They have combined both, and that I think would be important. When during Tamil Nadu visit, the president identified 4 commodities to be sort of considered on priority, but nothing moved out of the 23 products that we had provided. Steel imports continues to be a major issue. And RBI in 2019-12 study had shown the kind of situation that is there at the sectoral level. And China at the same time is also pushing in a Made in China 2025 initiative for 100% doing away with import dependence on final products. This was the table I was talking about, and if you see the tariff comparison, you find that in agriculture sector we are sort of almost double, but and that's a sensitive sector. But manufacturing we are quite competitive, and this is a very plain and simple story in terms of how China has structured. This is again a plotting of same on this graph, just to convey the point that India has somehow equaled in terms of the challenges that are emanating out of low tariff, if at all. That's the concern for many commentators. And if you look at the broad dimension, and that's where I come on the broad narrative of our today's discussion, things have moved in terms of our bilateral and regional agreements with EFTA, Thailand, Singapore, SAFTA, and Bhutan, Nepal, ASEAN, Korea, Japan, Malaysia. Our things have moved from 2000 to 2011, only to be added is Mauritius. But the point that I made right in the beginning, if you look at the share of our trade deficit coming out from countries with which we entered FTA and countries with which we do not have FTA, is a very clear reflection. Trade deficit ratio of the group of FTA countries has been lower than that of overall trade deficit ratio of India during that period of 2000 to 2017. So those who have been raising and Charanjit Singh have been telling this to our great friend Ashwini ji and others to see that data is speaking for itself. We need to be confident about the role and positioning that we need for FTAs, be that SEPA or SECA, and we need to work this out clearly on the basis of empirics and not just perception. We need to do that, and we need to do that in terms of the analysis that is there. Recently, we were also approached to do the calculations on employment imperatives of FTA, which we have undertaken. So that kind of work, I think, is important. The role of trade in the growth performance is immense, and we need to understand, unbundle it, and see that rather than looking at it more from emotional perspective. Dr. Veermani, I do not know whether you recall, but when you were Chief Economic Advisor and you used to hold meetings for economic survey, I had made a presentation to you in 2009-10 budget along with my colleague Professor S.K. Mohanty on electronically transferred files and the moratorium that was going on, and you had very kindly included a box item in the economic survey of 9-10 when we talked about the grave blunder that India committed in 1998 by signing ITA 1, and that pain continues for us because we have now ended up with huge import dependence, and we haven't encouraged that. Unfortunately, ITA 2, we could have in a way taken advantage. The jury, of course, is still out, but by our own analysis and papers, we have shown how we could have sort of compensated ourselves after that ITA 2 in 2013, which we decided to, 14, which we decided to give a miss in the Nairobi WTO ministerial. So some of those opportunities we need to revisit and see how trade investment, trade in services, trade facilitation and production, the matrix of 5, which I think is extremely important for us to go forward. As I think all the trade economists agree, trade data is a huge, huge pain for us. Agencies which have this data, they hold it back, be that RBI, MOCI. I'm on the board of RBI. I have been arguing with Governor and with Michael Patra for quite some time to help us and release that data. The customs, the DIPP, etc., also are in no way helping in terms of seeing how at least those importers of 323 products are told about the handholding that they need for imports. And that's where our major task today lies in terms of ensuring how our trade and growth can sort of go together. And that's where the periodic trade policy review that comes out, particularly of the kind of barriers that we need to see, product specific concentration for our products, and trying to see how future possibilities are in terms of different locations. And those dimensions, I think, are important. The complaints about under invoicing, etc., they continue, but we need to work out the details that are needed for us to see in what way trade-related dimensions can really be squarely addressed for us to contribute on taking a new strategy forward, which is not exactly based on our emotional connect with the whole issue, but is dependent in terms of what kind of plans for specific markets we are coming in. So I would stop here and would be very happy to have comments and clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There are a lot of intriguing. I mean, you've done it very briefly, but you covered a lot of area. Let me start the process by putting some questions on the table. Perhaps you can try and elaborate on them before I open it to others. Just start by commenting, because this is a general issue across the world. You know, the China model, I call it the ELSID model, which is export-led, import substituting, investment-driven, which is a contradiction, it looks like, to in a traditional framework. But given that China is a communist country and which has masqueraded very successfully as a as a free market economy, they can do both export-led and import substituting, and nobody knew about it, except some of us did for a long time. But most of the world, as Charan mentioned, we have been discussing this for a long time, even before I was at the IMF, where we were discussing these things. So for the general, those of you who are listening, who are here, you know, that the conventional trade theory cannot imagine this in a normal economy, but the Chinese have successfully done it. They can do both export-led and import substituting. That is something to keep in mind. A very interesting point you made about FTAs, a trade deficit versus non-FTAs or rest of the world. Now, I mean, I have certain views on RCEP versus FTAs with the developed countries. So any thoughts you have on that? You know, the contrast and what India's objective should be. I mean, well, in my view, the FTAs with USA, EU, etc., are more important than with RCEP, mainly because China is an essential member of RCEP. But whatever, I mean, you've done much more research. Mine are views based on my old information and logic. So whatever, some elaboration, your views, what has your recent research shown, etc., would be very useful. The second point, one is a third point on China, which again, I'm just putting these. You can pick up whatever you know you've researched on or you have thoughts on. This issue of China's export monopolies. You know, we're now talking about Quad cooperation and other such frameworks. So I think, of course, there is one from Indian perspective, which you covered, and I'll come to a few more questions on that. But in a Quad or a broader context, Quad plus context, you know, the export monopoly, you know, I'm sure people have identified products in which China has, you know, less than, more than 20%, 25, 50% of the market. And just some information you have picked up on that would be helpful for my thinking, you know, so whatever you can say on that. The second, actually, I want to make a small point which relates to your general comments, is that, you know, when I was at the IMF, what I tried to tell them was that openness, which includes both NTBs and tariffs. I think a very excellent point you made on the manufacturing tariffs. I think it's very important. And in fact, if you can share with your name and RIS on it, that table, I would like to use it. You know, obviously it'll be simpler for me if you put your name and RIS on it, then I can just use it. I don't have to separately attribute. But openness, you know, what I used to say was that NTBs and tariffs together actually determine your import GDP ratio. And if we look at, compare India with the large economies, Brazil, Japan, China, USA, etc., we are actually the most open economy. And you very correctly show that by that it's really agriculture which confuses things, and nobody really focuses on manufacturing and other things, so it's very important. I think that was a very important point. If you want to say a little more on that, that's fine, but otherwise that's just a comment I'm making. Manufacturing, yeah, I mentioned. ITA, I think I was the only person in government that every time I got a chance, I opposed ITA, because it just is, there's no economic logic to it, creating a separate place where you have zero tariffs. I mean, it's incredibly, I just don't know how, whether from a political economy point of view or an economics point of view, how they accepted this. Anyway, I was unsuccessful, but it's happy to see that at least the ITA 2 didn't go through. So I think, like you, I had a role in that. I used to constantly argue against this, but it was tough. But I'm happy that that has completely changed now. So why don't you kind of start with this? Maybe we'll bring in other people, and also I may have some other questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Veermani. And I think I fully agree with you on your last point. Let me begin from day on ITA. And as I said, you were the one who actually in the economic survey included a full box, which was running into half page of economic survey of 910. And it quoted our study with Mohanty, and we talked about it. The accumulated burden on Indian economy with ITA 1 is huge, and we already crippled our industry to go forward. So that point I think is very well taken, and had this been heard, probably we would have created some sort of Atmanirbhar IT industry at that point, and we won't have lost the opportunity. The second point about manufacturing, I would be very happy to share the table. And actually, Dr. Veermani, what we are doing is we have identified, this is part of a study. I would share the whole study with you. As of now, we haven't put it in public domain, but I would share with you. What we have done after this, on advice of the government, we have taken up 6 sectors for detailed study. So this is a general bilateral study. The detailed 6 sectors that we have chosen, they are pharmaceuticals, automobile parts and components, the electronics parts and components, solar sector. We have also chosen pharmaceuticals. So these are the areas that we have commissioned 6 different papers. And we are planning to come out with a sectoral strategy, which actually emphasizes the point that you made in terms of export monopoly of China in the Quad section, what can be done. There is also related information that I would like to bring to your attention. In the Quad, what we have now done at RIS, Dr. Veermani, is to launch a comparative analysis of 11 countries that have come up with the Indo-Pacific vision documents. And to what extent Quad can really look into the resilience of supply chains. And here, as CIM announced, RIS is the designated think tank for with Japan and with Australia to study supply chain and focus on rare earth metals. So this, Dr. Veermani, is one big sort of proposition that has emanated out of the Quad right now. There is no big public discussion about it, but this is where we are focusing on. So supply side resilience and our focus on rare earth is something that that we are focusing on. One brief paper RIS has put in public domain, but the other papers I would be very happy to share. They focus on actually on developing semiconductor industry. Taiwan and South Korea have come forward, and that's largely the dimension that we are trying to focus on. The Mohali-based semiconductor facility has already been roped in this effort, and we are trying to take that forward. So these were your 3 points. The first 2 points, let me come on the second point first, which is about the RCEP versus US and EU. And I agree with your position that the groupings where China is not there, we can move forward. But unfortunately, Dr. Virmani, as you would agree, we are not putting house in order in terms of the trade facilitation measures that are needed to reduce the cost of logistics. So Gati, Shakti and couple of other initiatives are very timely. They would reduce the transaction cost and also the cost in terms of factory to port. And now I think in that context, RIS is now into a new phase of work, which we never did in the past. But you have been writing about it, is in terms of state-led export strategies. And those state-led export strategies, since I have this responsibility in Madhya Pradesh, at least for Madhya Pradesh, I am trying now as Vice Chairman of their Planning Commission to see how export-led strategy for Madhya Pradesh can actually be a sort of template for landlocked states. So there are double landlocked states and single landlocked states. So how we can promote that, like Punjab is double landlocked state, and you would find Madhya Pradesh single. So one state we jump and we are at the port. So how we can have these state level initiatives, and that's where we are trying to get into. But the main point of whether RCEP or US EU, I think first and foremost would be Dr. Virmani, as you have already written out, is in terms of putting the house in order and reducing the cost for small and medium enterprises to become active in the global market. And that's where the asymmetry of information is something which is foreclosing options for several actors, and very few are able to survive. And trade financing gap is something which has not been studied, and in RIS we are not doing that. I think some effort is needed to bring in mega institutions together to see what kind of trade financing gap we are seeing in India, particularly for so-called engines of our trade, the MSMEs, but we have little idea about that. Your first point is a brilliant one when you said China actually could combine with great sophistication the import substitution, export promotion, and investment-led strategy. And I think that unique balance, I think, is something that they could achieve, and we need to bring and revisit the strategic trade theory. And the other day, RIS had invited Dr. Balwin for some discussion on trade theories and how China contradicts all of them. No conclusion we can derive out of that, but certainly I think some theorization is needed now in terms of the well-established trend from China and how we can go forward. So thanks for your very stimulating comments.
Yeah, thank you. So let me just follow up one small comment, and then I'll ask Charan maybe, or any of our other directors who want to ask a question before we open it to others. So one of the points you made, which I just want to give a brief comment on financing, actually trade financing. One of the elements I've always pushed is that if we could integrate the GST and the customs tariffs and the customs system, then you could make that whole thing almost and connect it to the banks and RBI. You could have instantaneous credit. So if there were good interlinkages between the elements of export and import and GST, then you could get automatic GST credit, for tax paid. Plus, you could also get credit from the banks, because everything would be known. It would all be that whole channel. If one could integrate it, there would be, I can't see how there'd be any problem left, because you could get instant credit. You could specify the times. The moment you get a payment, you have to repay the credit. It would work very smoothly. And I've tried to push this again make the customs and others understand it's a hard process. So I'm mentioning it. Maybe you can also take it up in your interactions. Okay, it doesn't really require a comment. So let me turn to Charan first. You want to ask some questions, make some comments? Yeah.
Yes, Professor, very impressed and very informative. So we have learned a lot. Now, I had three issues in my mind, and I would like to know your views on that. And these are, I suppose, general issues from the technical discussion which our chairman has just had with you. So, in comparison, very general. Now, one thing, Professor, I keep thinking is in the investment pattern, many unicorns in India are still dependent on China. Paytm, Flipkart, Big Basket, Swiggy. Is there any such unicorn in China which is dependent on Indian investment or Indian technology? One. Secondly, when the pandemic happened and there was a call for a short time that this is coming from China, we need not buy things from China. There was a fear that India's drug market, the medical market, market, is excessively dependent on China. Now, is there anything like that in China which is dependent on Indian market? And is there a way that we could have reduced this dependency? Of course, Dr. Virmani, of course, is an authority on this, but I have been writing in a general sense that who allowed China to become the industrial monopoly of the world? And that's why the single monopoly now having problem, the whole supply chain has been devastated. The third issue that I had in mind was China is also very vast and a very old civilization. India, of course, we all know is 5,000 old civilization. Is there a potential for win-win agreements? And one such area that I had in mind was the tourism sector. So is there a potential for tourism to expand exponentially between China and India while we gain, we learn from each other, the friendliness increases, while developing this tourism sector, both the countries gain with the Western world coming in. So these issues, if you could throw some light on, please.
Thank you. Thanks for your remarks. I think all the 3 points are extremely important. We need to see the broad dimensions that are related to the question of our participation with China in more or less the engagements that are there, both in terms of unicorn, as you said, the whether any of our unicorns have achieved the kind of success that we see of Chinese investment here. I do not know of a single one. We have very minutely analyzed Indian investments in China, and we have tracked down. Unfortunately, we haven't got any lead on any of our initiatives which are fully allowed to bloom there, and an n number of hurdles in investment, as I said, are there in case of trade. The pandemics, whether China is dependent on our products, not really, because what I showed, they are dependent on the trade surplus that we are generating for them as part of trade deficit, but not on our export of any item on which they are crucially dependent. So that part I think is important. Your third point I think is very interesting. It is important for us to work out the details, but history shows that the countries in which China has worked, whether South Korea or even Japan, they initially begin with tourism, start sending their tourists, and when it occupies some major market share, then they start extracting the returns, which are not in tourism sector per se, but in other sectors. And we have seen this arm twisting in case of South Korea and in many other countries. So those challenges are there with China, and it is about the mindset of the current leadership in China, which is too much into arm twisting and getting pennies out rather than investing for future partnerships. And otherwise, I mean, I am myself in touch with several Chinese scholars across universities and think tanks, and all are fine gentlemen. We have been working with them in international platforms, in national bilateral ones, but nowhere we see this kind of sort of mindset. It is current dispensation, but I think we should keep our optimism up. And I agree with you that we should continue to strive for identifying areas where joint partnership is possible. So that win-win, if not happening now, I'm sure would happen at some point. When exactly, we do not know now that the president is for lifetime, but only one entity in the world knows, and that's our God. So I don't know when the situation will change.
Yeah, thank you. So before I come to other director, Dr. Vishan Das, I'm just coming to you, Ashok. I
Yes.
just want to take up an issue which, which Dr. Kushan Mohan Patnaik has also raised on logistics, because you had also talked about logistics. Now, when I did this, looked at about a year ago or 9 months ago, comparing the logistics index and the and related matters, what was clear was that in all the ones which I saw at that time, we were better than Vietnam, ranked. This is the World Bank's ranking overall and the details which that give. China was above both of us, and then the highest was Malaysia, Thailand, and some of those countries which have been in the game for a long time. So in this context, which is Mr. Dr. Patnaik's question also, would you have some comparative picture you have? Is that sound right? Haven't we improved? For example, my impression was that there has been a lot of improvement in infrastructure over the last 5 to 10 years, actually, perhaps starting slowly and then accelerating. So any thoughts on the
Actually,
the perspective?
yeah, no, Dr. Virmani, I agree with you, and I realize the point that you're making. And as I was saying, data doesn't support our research analysis from that point of view of giving credit to the recent initiatives that have come because of the infrastructure efforts. We tried to compare the unit cost of our products and our competitiveness. So for Latin American markets, there is just one study we have recently finished, and I do not see our export numbers going up that way in Latin American market as reflecting the advantage of logistics. We still do well in the unit cost of production, but not in figuring in, not translating that in the trade advantage. So at least in Latin American case, I am very clear about the evidence that we have. But as you also agreed in the beginning, some effort for trade statistics in the country, I think is very badly needed.
Okay, let me, Ashok.
Yes.
Vishan Das? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, good evening. Yeah, good evening. And Professor Sachin, I congratulate you for such a wonderful and analytical presentation, and you captivated the audience. One small question you gave about the myth about the China, and it is not necessarily the least cost source of importing. Then the question arises why Indian importers fall back on China. One explanation could be, you said, you hinted that trade facilitation, and they gave some kind of credit. But have you worked out if they are not the least cost producer, then how much above the world average least cost country? How much on top of it the Chinese unit cost products are there? That is number one. And second, what are the other facility which outweigh and people are willing to pay that higher cost?
Thanks, Professor Ashok. Thanks for your kind words. But important point here is that traders do not realize that they are really paying high price. That's the whole fun of it, because we are just not aware of the other markets. We found these 327 products, out of which, as I said, if you remove the steel industry related 7 products for which no alternatives are possible, we are crucially dependent on China. The other products, 323 products, you see the global share of these 323 products. And as I said, for each of these 323 products, I got 17 countries which are also producing that product and exporting it. And they are, then I divided those 17 countries in 3 categories. If I import from X, my import cost would go up by 5% or by 10% or by 15%. So if this is the kind of spectrum that is coming in, it is the role of the state to jump in. What is happening now is that you have left your importers on their own, and exporters are being taken care of. So this mindset is an issue, and we need to see how we do handholding for our importers. And asymmetry of information is leading to huge payment of cost, irrespective of what sector we are talking of. So but now we need to do a bit of redressal with several Latin American countries are supplying that, and distance is not such a major issue. We can, if some facilitation is done, it is possible to import goods from Latin America and do our exports with them. We have undermined that. And recently, Survey did this study sometime back on the regional development banks. India is not a member of the Ibero-American Regional Development Bank. It requires something like $350 million to be paid. And in DEA, discussion is going on whether it would have good returns on our membership, what advantage we would get. And 17, this proposal was blocked. Now this year, this bank has given a project of $5 billion to South Korea, which also took that membership in 2018. And they got it. So now they are saying that if South Korea could get, why not we line up for and take the membership, then how much size of project we get. So sometimes we take a very narrow view of things and lose out on the larger possible gains. And that's what Professor Ashok, I was trying to say, that we miss out on these opportunities from other markets. And we are only confined to China because today the exporter goes to, or the importer goes to China, visits the market, orders it, and he has to just come back and he would receive the goods at his shop or at his factory. He need not bother at all. They have their agents which would clear not only at their end, but also in your own customs house here. So those agents are handling all the entities. In fact, our research team before COVID could interview 2 of them in Mumbai and 1 in Visakhapatnam. So these agents are working for imports from China, which are never discussed, which we never highlight. How many of our entities are present in those markets to do the extra legwork for our importers? And this is when we are dependent on 68% of our intermediates from China. We are not importing final products from China. We are importing intermediates, which are possible from other markets. So these strategies require a detailed and deeper thinking in terms of the institutional ecosystem that we require, on which our chair today has mentioned right at the outset.
Yeah. So, thank you. So I really look forward to looking at this matrix which you have put 17 countries And this thing, I hope if you don't have my email, I guess we'll send it to you. With that, Charan, do you have any other questions? Should I'll open up for Q&A from the audience. Is there any?
Yes, please do that. And I do not know if Dr. Krishna Mohan wants to ask his question, still wants to ask, but please open it to the audience.
Yeah. So any question from the audience? Is there anybody either in the chat box or raise your hand? I guess people should, yeah. Okay, in the meanwhile, let me, the supply chain, of course, you mentioned very specifically the Quad has focused on, selective things like the semiconductors, which are a current problem, and the special materials, rare earths, which is an old problem, which started with China banning this export, I think, to Japan at some point. But the more general, do you have some idea? You probably know better the SCLRI, the supply chain initiative. Can you give us a very brief update on that? What is besides this? Is anything happening?
So far, it is extremely, I would say, lopsided in the sense that the Quad initiative and the discussions that are happening more at the national level. So, as I was saying, Japan, Australia, and India have a trilateral grouping on supply chain, and this supply chain resilience within the Indo-Pacific is largely what Quad has taken up. But these three countries in this region are taking forward, and that's where CIM launched last year in terms of providing that further traction. Now, with the entry of EU, Dr. Veermani, that's another sort of fulcrum emerging in terms of connectivity. So, in February, you might have seen India-EU agreement talking about addressing connectivity, and one dimension of connectivity that they mentioned was to bring in resilience in supply chains. So with the disruption on supply of intermediates from China, world over supply chains have become areas of concern, and more countries are now trying to see how with few possible producers we can connect, and some of those discussions now are taking shape. India-EU dialogue is also on track in terms of this resilience that is needed.
Yeah, I think I don't see any questions, so I'll just emphasize very important point which people may not understand. This whole concept of asymmetric information, which you have emphasized, I think is very, very important. I see that Dr. Krishna Mohan Patnaik wants to ask, so maybe the last question. Dr. Patnaik, you want to comment, ask a question? I think we'll give you the final. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to know if we include services into the analysis, how they look like. China, I mean, I'm aware of the asymmetric information scenario in terms of services and trade in services, but would there be any change in terms of the results? That's what I'm just wondering.
Not really, Dr. Patnaik, because as you appreciate, the story in goods and services that way is very different. We ourselves crucially dependent, but hardly bothered in terms of trade classification and even trade strategy. We are now pressing and talking about it, despite of our huge sort of success with services. So in our analysis, we did not include that, and I think there again, data is a big issue, and also the way nations have classified the sector. So that is, I think, a difficult position.
Yeah, my last simple-minded question could be if.
Yeah, speak up. I think you're not very clear.
My last question would be Professor, that when we are looking at the maritime competitiveness of India, we import manufactured containers from China. I mean, my simple-minded thought would be that I don't see why we can't manufacture such containers in India. And because we import manufactured containers and we are so much dependent on China for these manufactured containers, and because of the lack of containers in the market, now there is, and the question of rebound of containers from the other countries to India, and all this that is going on in these big issues that are going on in maritime sector could hamper India's competitiveness. How do you see this issue in light of this India-China competitiveness?
Dr. Patnaik, I would very much like to draw your kind attention to two documents from Government of India, which would probably answer your question. The first document is a 7-volume report from Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council on the idea of blue economy. In the 4th volume, you would find details about the shipbuilding industry and our endeavors in terms of the Bharatmala project. The second document is what Prime Minister recently launched with the Shipping Ministry for Vision 2030 for the shipping industry. The Maritime University in Chennai has been tasked to take this proposition forward in terms of how we can build our shipping industry. So the whole blue economy concept, which now is before the Niti Aayog and before the Shipping Ministry, is to develop precisely what you are saying. Because unfortunately, we not only depend on oil to come from different countries, but we also depend on the containers, and the containers invariably come from China. And after the erosion of London as a financial base, we also depend on Chinese containers to bring in insurance and reinsurance of those containers, which are bringing oil for us. So you can see the crucial outflow of this, of money. And unfortunately, the presence of Indian banks abroad, we need to promote that. And no one other than Mr. Charan Singh would know better how much is our dependence, because our banks do not provide the counter guarantee that is needed for import of such high quality products and of such high volume and quantity. So this is something which requires multifold guarantee and bandwidth to provide that counter guarantee. And the foreign exchange deposit that we have, we would have to see what use we can make of that for providing counter guarantee for our oil import, and we reduce our dependence on China or London for providing insurance guarantee. So some big ticket items still require detailed analysis, and as in another incident that Dr. Veermani was mentioning, that we need to combine the information that is coming in and provide support to our exporters if they can all get the GST customs tariff and information from RBI to give them automatic credit. This, if you extrapolate, you take it to insurance, reinsurance at the global market when you're importing high quantity, high quantum products, and that's where we would have to think of. As in case of infrastructure financing, we have thought of DFI, and DFI has come in. We also need to bring in a similar approach on a much larger scale for providing insurance and reinsurance, which is a huge drag on our resource base. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Charan, you had a last question, then I'm going to conclude.
Yeah, I had listening to Professor Sachin is so interesting, and he brings ideas and thoughts. Professor, a few years back, I was abroad and studying, and therein I met a couple of Chinese students. To be precise, I'm talking of a discussion we had in September 2004. And when I was interacting with these Chinese students, and some of them were professors who had come from China to study at Stanford. Now, one thing I realized then, and just 2 decades have passed by, and that's why I'm mentioning it to you, and kindly tell us if it's still true. The issue that they brought that, why we are able to produce at low cost, the reason they gave was that with the countries on the periphery of China, they have signed long-term trade agreements, long-term, and they can take petrol or I think fuel from Turkmenistan. At that point, they were telling me I can't believe it, $1 something, but they said the agreement is for next 40 years. So China says that all the fluctuations that will take place, I'm taking care of that. And therefore the ups and downs are being evened out. And that's why I'm offering this, and the country agreed. And so they said that with all its neighboring countries, for whatever reason, as you said, arm twisting or blackmailing or sweet talking, whatever reason, or providing them an security umbrella, whatever reason, China has been able to extract such low cost agreements with its neighbors. And that was one of the primary reasons for the low cost production that they did. Now, does that still hold true, or have the neighbors woken up to ground realities and making
You
the best of
know, Chiran Singh ji, about Maldives.
So it's
Maldives
on.
case, yes.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's been very fascinating, and I really look forward to your paper or reading that. In fact, the sooner I get it, I want to read it quickly. But with that, I thank you and thank you and conclude this session. Charan will say a few words.
Yes, Professor, once again want to thank you for an excellent talk, because it's been so provoking and thoughts have been coming so much. And that's what I think is a hallmark of an excellent talk, which provokes ideas and thoughts. So thank you very much for sparing the time and coming and speaking under the aegis of IGROW Foundation. I have some very interesting observations to make. First one is that next week we are dedicating to COVID, and Professor Ashima Goyal from IGIDR is going to be speaking to us about the COVID-19 experience and India's growth story. And I think that's going to be another very interesting talk. Professor Ashima Goyal brings all that experience with her. On Wednesday, 2 days before Ashima offers her talk, we have a study from Indian Institute of Human Development, Professor Endau, and UNICEF, presenting under the aegis of IGROW a study on socio-economic implications of COVID-19. They've done a quick study. It's based on wave 1. So they will be presenting their results and sharing their recommendations which they have with us under the aegis. So that is Wednesday. Both the studies, both the presentations will be from 4 to 5 p.m. on Wednesday and Friday next. I would also like to mention that on November 19, we have Professor Paul Milgrom, the Nobel laureate, speaking to us on auction system. With the national asset monetization and other things that are happening in the country, what is the appropriate structure of auction is very, very important. And he's going to bring that to us, Professor Milgrom, the Nobel laureate on auction. So with this, let me once again thank Dr. Virmani, our chairman, to chair this session, Professor Sachin to present his views to us in such detail, spend so much time, the participants to be with us on a Friday evening and share their thoughts. This, let me again conclude and thank each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.